And we are live. Good morning and welcome to What's Up with Power. Thank you for joining us. We are so happy to have you here. We've got another awesome presentation. Today, we're going to be talking all about interpreting your data, analyzing that power data post-ride. And we've got our good friend, Nate Dunn from Data Driven Athlete, warming up, ready to come in. And he's even upgraded his setup this week. He's got a green screen for us. So look at this, Mr. Nate Dunn. How you doing there?
I'm doing great. Yeah, great to be here again, Justin.
We're happy to have Nate on board. Lots of great content from him. Switch back here to looking at the waiting pen while we wait for the group ride to start. We're about 2 minutes out from starting the ride, and haven't been able to join us on Zwift, you should do so. Go when you log into the game, it'll show you the list of events that are about to start. Just click to join the What's Up with Power ride and ride along with us and listen to the presentation. There's actually been some studies that show that your cognitive ability, or how much you learn, can actually be increased by learning while exercising. So look at that, another reason to ride along with us as you watch the show. So another minute and 30 seconds for the group ride rolls. I'm gonna type in a message here to the people joining us. So www.zwift.com. Zwift Live, not ZwiftLiver. Okay. Decent group here. We've got quite a few folks joining us on Facebook, which is great to have. Bring Nate back on the screen here. Prep for the beginning of the group ride. And we toss the ball over to him, about 15 seconds away. Getting this timing is tricky. Getting the nice. Here we go. Group ride starting, and without any further ado, I'm gonna hop off the screen, get Nate going all by himself, and I'll just advance the slides for you.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me again on the Zwift Live group ride this morning. Today, we're going to be talking about interpreting your data. And if we could get to the next slide, please. So there's a couple different perspectives that we have when we look at data. And so kind of starting with the largest perspective, we have what some of you guys have read about. We've had some presentations on it before, but kind of the performance manager chart perspective, or what I would say the largest kind of global perspective on all your data. So that kind of being the largest perspective, then we have weekly and monthly trends. And I believe in some of the future presentations you're going to have, they'll be talking about some of those perspectives on viewing your data. And then file review. And then if you want to get even down kind of more into the weeds, kind of on the bike, or how you might display your data on your Garmin or other device. So today, we're going to be talking specifically about interpreting your data in a file review and kind of that process that you might go through on a day-to-day basis. So next slide, please. So first up, when we talk about reviewing your data on a day-to-day basis, you want to ask yourself these two basic questions, and that is, what do you want to see, and how is it that you want to see it? So we're going to break that out a little bit more in depth in looking specifically at an interval workout, and then we'll look really briefly at how you might also analyze a race file or a group ride file. So next slide, please. So this is what I kind of call the data blast perspective. So this is a screenshot using WKO4 software, but you can get the same perspective essentially using Training Peaks. So whatever you're using, I'm sure all of you have kind of seen this, and this is basically every single data channel that you've got that's recorded on your device as it's shown. So I'm a little bit different, and I like this perspective, but I also look at this all day long, and so it might make a little bit more sense to me. But for most people, I really suggest to them that if you're looking at your own data and you're trying to really understand it, is to develop a perspective where you're eliminating a lot of these data channels and you're just kind of getting the bare bones. So if we go to the next slide, this is probably the perspective that I use the most when I'm looking at ride files, and that is really I want to see power. Oftentimes I want to see the relationship of heart rate to power. And then I like to see elevation in there just to give me a little bit of context about maybe where those efforts are happening on climbs or whatnot. So again, this is using the WKO4 software where you can customize, what channels you have coming through, but you can do the same thing with Training Peaks where you can hide different data channels at the top of the screen there. And you can really just give yourself the ability to focus directly on what it is that you're wanting to see rather than get distracted with every single imaginable data channel out there. So first process, again, is to ask yourself, what is it that you want to see? And then develop your own kind of lens or the own way that you like to look at this so you can kind of get right into the meat of the ride file and start learning from it. So next slide, please. So when we're looking at an interval workout file, or really if we're looking at any type of ride file, these are the three questions, or these are kind of the three main points that I like to emphasize. And first of all, what is the ride objective? So what was the point of the ride? Now it might be that for some of your rides, you don't really have a ride objective. Maybe your ride objective is, you know what, I haven't been feeling that well. I just want to spend 2 hours on the bike. And in that case, your data review might be really simple, right? You're not looking for any trends. You're not looking for anything more specifically. You're just looking at, yeah, I spent 2 hours on the bike and that was fine. But for a ride or for a workout where you have a more specific objective, it's important to look at ahead of time and to say, what was my ride objective for this file? And then the second question, what does the data tell me, right? What does it tell me in relation to that ride objective? And then we're going to get into this a little bit later, but also what are any external factors that might have contributed to my success or my failure in achieving that ride objective? So this is the really basic process of looking at your ride data, looking at your file for that day, and kind of filtering through, asking these different questions and trying to learn from that file. So next question, please, or next slide. So for this file that we're going to look at, the objective for this specific file that we're going to look at was to spend about 40 minutes riding near this rider's lactate threshold. And this is a workout that a lot of you are familiar with. It's probably the most popular power-based workout, and that is a 2 by 20 minutes. So 2 by 20 minutes at FTP, right? So very simple ride objective, should be very easy to see whether or not we've accomplished this goal. So next slide, please. So we're going to look at, we've identified what the objective was for the ride. We've identified how the ride is supposed to achieve that objective. And then now we ask ourselves, well, did we succeed or did we fail in this workout? So next slide, please. So we have this, again, this perspective where we've cleaned out a lot of the data channels, and it is very simple, very easy to see exactly what our power was over the duration of this workout and kind of how that relates to our heart rate. So again, this is using the WKO4 software, but you can get a similar perspective using Training Peaks. And it's difficult for you to see probably, but on the bottom end, we have both of our laps that are selected. So this is another thing that I would really encourage you whenever you're doing workouts to always use your lap button if possible. For really short duration intervals, it might not be possible. If you're doing 15-second sprints, it might not be realistic for you to hit your lap button, start and stop on your lap button. But for anything longer, it makes your post-ride analysis much, much easier. And it makes it much quicker to be able to log into whatever software you're using and to immediately identify these efforts. So for this file, we have laps around these 20-minute efforts, and then we have summary data kind of below the graphical data. We have summary data that shows us exactly, how it enables us to compare these different laps and then to come up with some basic determinations about the success or failure in this. So in this one, we see each of these intervals were 20 minutes. First one was at 300 watts. Second one was at 301 watts. If we slide over, we can see that that's at 103 and 104% of this rider's lactate threshold. So really clean cut, easy to see. Our ride objective was to spend about 40 minutes at lactate threshold. And boom, we can see immediately that this ride was a success, right? That we successfully accomplished this goal. So this is pretty much as simple as it gets in terms of being able to drill down into a ride file and to analyze it. But a good example of kind of how to work through that process of what was my objective, did I succeed in that objective, and what that looks like when you're looking at the data. So next slide, please. So again, if we want to ask ourselves, what enabled us to be successful in this workout? So what this perspective is that we have one of the laps selected. So in the top view of the data, we have the second lap or the second 20-minute segment selected, and then the bottom view is kind of that specific lap exploded. And in that exploded view, we can see the trend line, which again is probably very difficult to see on some of your screens, but the trend line of that 20-minute data is that the power is going up over the course of that 20 minutes. So one of the determinations we can make is that this rider felt really, really good during this workout, right? Instead of the power kind of dropping off and us barely being able to achieve this power target at the end, on the second interval of this workout, the rider was able to continue to ride harder and harder and harder to complete that objective. So when we look at all this, we say, okay, this rider successfully achieved the objective of spending 40 minutes at lactate threshold, and not only that, their pacing was really, really good, and they felt really good on this ride. So that kind of leads us to our third item to look at here. And what are external factors? Whenever you have a really good workout, or conversely, if you have a really bad workout, I think it's important to say what contributed to that, right? Because if it's a really good workout, we want to say, how can we replicate that? How can we capture that? How can we better understand what are the other pieces that contributed to that great ride? Or if it was a bad ride, how can we fix that? Was our, what contributed to us failing at that workout? So that's kind of the third and final piece that exists outside the data specifically, but might have had a big impact on that ride. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So these are some of those pieces of external factors that I think can often contribute to the success or failure of that ride. So training fatigue, right? And we measure that, with power-based training by maybe looking at a rider's TSB or their ATL. So in an objective sense, how much training fatigue did we have going into that ride? How about work stress? And again, this is something that doesn't show up in power-based metrics, but it can have just as much of an impact. So if you had a really, really stressful day at work, really stressful day maybe at home, that could very well have a big impact on trying to do a demanding workout in the evening. And that can be really important to note and to add that comment maybe on your ride to know kind of, what contributed to you maybe not successfully completing that ride. So nutrition, if you have a ride in the afternoon, what was your nutrition like from 12 o'clock to 4 o'clock? If the last time you ate lunch was at 12 o'clock and you rode at 5 o'clock and you didn't eat anything, chances are, you're not going to ride as well as you could because you're just not fueled properly. And then also sleep, right? So how did you sleep the night before? What was your sleep like? How has your sleep been like over the past week or so? So these are just some examples of different external factors that can be important to note when you're kind of analyzing that ride file. So next slide, please. So this is kind of drilling down. We talked about this briefly, but giving some context to your data. So this is an example of using training peaks where on this specific ride file, we can see that this rider's CTL was 89, their ATL was 67, and then their TSB was 28. So some of this, some of this terminology might not make a lot of sense. But for those of you that are familiar with kind of some of these power-based terms, what jumps out to me is a TSB of 28, that this rider was very, very well rested. So a lot of this is starting to make sense now. They really nailed this workout. Their pacing was great. Even into the second interval, they were increasing their power as the interval went on. So this might be kind of a keystone workout where we might say, in the future to say, hey, if I'm expecting to be at my best when I'm doing a really demanding workout, it might be necessary for my TSB to be somewhere in that 20 to 25 range, really, really well rested. And then the opposite of that might be to say, hey, it's okay that if I'm not really well rested, to not beat myself up and to say, why am I not able to, stay right on top of my power targets? And to say, well, you know what, I'm just not as rested as I could be. And so that's okay. I don't have to have that standard or that expectation of myself that I'm always going to be on form, that I'm always going to be nailing it for a workout. And that can be also kind of an important building block mentally to say, there are a lot of different variables that can impact you being at your best on the bike. Sometimes it's good to expect that you will be, and then other times it's good to say, a lot of other stuff going on, maybe 90% of my FTP on these intervals is going to be good for me today. And maybe that's success for me rather than always trying to, be at the top end of that target. So, putting all these together in terms of, these external factors, first of all, looking and seeing if maybe some of your other ride data can help inform your success or failure. And then looking at some of these other subjective pieces can also be an important part of that file review. So next slide, please. So kind of an overview identifying the the right objective, what is it, what story does the data tell us, and then any of those external factors. So next slide. So we're going to look real briefly here. So this is an example of a race file, and we have a blog post on our site at datadrivenathlete.com that runs into this in much more depth. But this is one of the screenshots of one of the races that one of our coaches talked about. And this is kind of an example of doing the same type of thing, looking really critically at a ride file, but maybe drawing some different conclusions and maybe looking for different things. So this was a long road race. And if you can't see here, we can explain some of this. But in this race, there's 91 miles or about 2,500 kilojoules until the keystone climb in this race. So what we've done is that we've highlighted this key climb, and you can see that kind of in the bottom section of the data perspective. So we've highlighted this key climb and then made some important determinations about this climb. So for this rider, their peak 5-minute lifetime PR happened at the beginning of this climb. So another kind of fun way to look at a ride file and to maybe plan ahead for different races or for different events, and to say, if my expectation is that I'm going to be at my best, at 91 miles into a road race, what type of preparation does it take? What type of planning does it take to ensure that at that point in a race, I can still be at my best? Or if you were in a race like this, no matter what the length or intensity of it was, and if 20 minutes into that race, or an hour and a half into that race, you find that you weren't able to produce one of your best efforts, then maybe you would kind of rewind a little bit and to say, what does my training look like up until this point? And have I not prepared to kind of produce a best effort on fatigued legs? So we're not going to spend a ton of time, a ton more time picking apart kind of how to do race or group ride analysis, but a similar type of perspective of looking at, what was your ride objective in this race file? It was to be with the leaders on this climb. What does the data tell us? Well, the data tells us that this rider was really fit. Their training was appropriate, enabling them to do a lot of work and to still to be prepared to kind of nail a best effort at this climb. And then any external factors that might have influenced this. So when it comes to a race or whatnot, I'd go through that same list to say, what was my sleep like? What was my other stress in my life like? And I kind of look at all those pieces and how you might, tweak those to be more successful. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So I think in future presentations, you're going to be breaking down some of these other data perspectives of kind of the larger performance manager chart, weekly trends. But for this one, for the file review process, I think the kind of take-home message is to develop your own process. So I've talked about a process that works for me, that I'm comfortable with, but you might have one that's a little bit different. And maybe you have a perspective on data where you like to show some other data channels that we didn't talk about here. But whatever that is, develop your own and kind of systemize it. So when you're looking at your ride files, you're not opening up a ride file and kind of saying, well, what am I looking at? What am I doing? It might mean that some of your ride files, maybe you don't really look at. Maybe you just look at the summary metrics on them, and then other ones you drill down a little bit further. But I think that developing your own process, kind of using some of these keys that we talked about, will enable you to get a lot more information from your ride files without maybe feeling overwhelmed with everything that's offered now, with all the different sensors and whatnot. So we're going to jump to the Q&A session, and if you guys have any questions, you can send them, write them out on Facebook. Any offline questions, you can look up our website there and send any questions to me. But yeah.
Okay, I am going back on the screen here. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Nate. And like you said, if you have any questions on this file review process, Fly will be here. I wanted to make an observation that that was a pretty impressive 5-minute effort, 91 miles into a race, 491 watts for 5 minutes. That's a Cat 1 level. Must have been was he a pro or a Cat 1 or? Yeah,
so that was from one of our coaches, Sam Bassetti, and that was in a UCI race in the Dominican Republic. So yeah, if I was able to do that 5-minute power, 90 miles into a race, I would be equally excited about that.
I think if I could do that 5-minute power anytime, I'd be excited.
Well, and it actually brings up a good point, is that oftentimes, we have the Tour of California going on right now down here in California. And oftentimes when people look at a pro's power data, they say, I could do 5 minutes for that or whatever. And then you say, well, wait a minute. You have to attach, right, 90 miles of racing to that effort. And then maybe, 5, 6, 7 days of racing prior to that effort. And, that kind of gives you a little bit more context into, the big difference between a professional rider and then a world tour rider, and just those of us that, like me, who I go out on a KOM and I'm totally fresh. I haven't ridden at all. And then I go as hard as I can for 5 minutes. And then that's my best 5-minute effort.
Right.
So.
Totally.
And you got to look at their weight in the equation as well.
Absolutely. You got to
Sure.
bring the weight into the equation, especially on a climb.
Some of us weigh a little bit more than those guys.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like when Tom Scoons crashed, you almost saw his bones. There was hardly anything in between that his kit and his bones. You see that crash?
I did not. Was that in the Tour of California? Or?
Yeah, it was 2 days ago, Tour California.
Okay.
He was very disoriented when he got off the ground.
Yeah, I don't. I just crashed in a race 2 weeks ago. I don't like looking at crash videos. Like when they come on, usually I'm just like, I don't need any of that. It doesn't.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I think the other thing I want to point out here is the other thing to enable you to put out a maximal 5-minute effort that far into a race is your smarts and your strategy leading up to the 91, leading up to that climb. Because
Sure.
you could have absolutely gone super hard and not had anything in the tank. I mean, it's just a matter of your positioning in the pack, where your teammates are at, when you decide to put in efforts, if you're trying to trace down breakaways, or if you've got teammates to do it. All these things play into whether or not you'll be prepared at that point in time to make that effort. And you got to know ahead of time what's your plan, and you might have to adjust the plan on the fly.
Yeah, and kind of getting back to some of those external factors, I think that can be one of the most important things to take into consideration whenever you're looking at a race, or even if that's a race on Zwift or whatever, is to say, what time of day was it? What was my meal like yesterday? If you're getting up really early in the morning, it might be that if you have a Zwift ride or a Zwift race that you're really kind of geared up for, you might have to wake up 2 hours before that happens to ensure that you get a good enough breakfast, right? If it's a long road race, what was your nutrition like leading up to that race? What was it like in the 2 hours before that 5-minute max effort? So, the data just kind of tells us what happened, and then there's a lot to be understood from that. But then looking at kind of a holistic picture of all the different other pieces, and sometimes, and I arrive at this, oftentimes. Sometimes you look through that whole list, and you're like, look, I did everything right. I slept great. I'm not stressed. I ate really well, and I just wasn't very good, and that's okay too, right? But and I think that's another skill entirely, is to say, yeah, I don't know. I looked at all the different pieces. I just wasn't very good. I don't know. And that skill is saying, I'm over it. Now we're going to move on to the next day. Right. So it's good to drill down, and I think to try and learn as much as you can from your data. But then it's also a good skill to say, there aren't any answers here. There's nothing to be learned, or maybe in a future date, I could learn a little bit when I come back and look at this later. But for now, I have no idea. We're moving on to the next day. So that's another important skill, I think, too, to not get lost in all the minutia of, well, what happened, what didn't happen, what's my CTL, what all this kind of stuff. So another important skill to consider.
Very, very true. I actually have a question for you. So back when we were analyzing the 2x20 workout, we talked about how the rider was very fresh. So it had a TSB of 28. They did the workout. So what would be your guidance, or what would you expect to see? Obviously, let's say at the end of a 2 or 3 week long training block, you're going to hope that your TSB isn't that high.
Yeah.
And what would you say to someone who maybe is having a lot more difficulty at the end of that 2 to 3 week block doing that same 2x20, or what's your guidance there?
Yeah. So what I usually tell athletes is that whenever you have a demanding workout like a 2x20, or really any interval workout that's really intense, that's, I would say, threshold and above, is to say give yourself a leash of somewhere between 90 and 100% of FTP if you're talking specifically about a threshold workout. And on the one hand, because I think for most people, their lives don't happen in 3-week training blocks, right? Is that they had to pick up their kid, unexpectedly from school, and they missed a workout, and so maybe they're a little bit extra rested for their following day, or maybe other stuff was going on. So very rarely, in my experience, is there kind of this even build of fatigue and fitness and on and off. So what I've found to be, I think, the best approach is to say, whatever day it is, give yourself a buffer of maybe 90 to 100%. And on the day where maybe you had some unexpected rest, then expect of yourself that you're going to really get on it, and that you're going to try as hard as possible, if you feel good, to sit right there at 100%, or maybe even go over 100% of FTP for those intervals. And then at the same token, if you've had a lot going on in your life, go out, see how you feel, and then maybe within 5 minutes of that effort, maybe you say, hey, you know what? It's going to be everything I can do to hang on at 90% today. And that's okay. I'm going to give myself that license, because when I feel good, I know I'm going to push the envelope a little bit. And then when I've got a lot going on in life, maybe I'm going to back off a little bit. So I know for some people that's really difficult, because when they see something on a schedule, on a workout, if they see 100%, anything outside 100% is failure to them. And they're disappointed, and they're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening. So what I really try and do is to give a specific target while still giving a range that allows for flexibility in what's going on in life. And that would be my number one focus, is to identify all those different pieces, and to say, well, hey, look, if you're not taking care of your nutrition as well as you should, then that's a mistake, and you need to fix that. But if there are other factors that you can't control, whether or not that's work stress or family stress, then give yourself some flexibility when you get on the bike, to say 90% is what I've got today. Boom, let's get it, and then now I'm done. So that would be my suggestion, is to give yourself a range that still gets you close to that intensity near a lactate threshold, and then call it good. Now, if you're constantly failing and you're never able to get close to 100%, then maybe you take a step back and you say, well, what's the problem here? I need to, maybe my expectations are too high in terms of how much I can train, or, maybe something else is going on. But on a day-to-day basis, mixing kind of feeling great at 100% with some of those rides with, lesser intensity rides, I think is a good approach.
Yeah. And the other thing, if you're failing the workouts, maybe it's time to revisit your FTP. Maybe you haven't been training for a while. Maybe your FTP has actually dropped. And
sure.
That can actually help you a lot to drop your FTP, because now you start to feel successful from completing your workouts, rather than feeling like a failure every time you work out.
Yeah, absolutely. So that we had talked about this in a previous presentation, but if you're constantly failing at the intensity target of your workouts, then looking at kind of that whole picture, and maybe that's your FTP is too high, fatigue, nutrition, all that kind of stuff. Listing out all those things can be really helpful.
Absolutely. Let's see here.
Sometimes it's kind of tough mentally when you have this FTP number and you go out to do a workout, even if it's like a 5-minute block or something. Sometimes it's just hard to even hold your FTP, and you're just like, what is going on here? Yeah, that's kind of a mental block that I get.
Yeah, well, and I would what my suggestion would be in that case is to maybe you don't even set a predetermined target when you go out on a ride, and you say, I'm going to get 5 minutes in. So if we're talking specifically about like a 2x20 workout, I'm going to see how I feel 5 minutes in, and then I'm going to make a call on where I'm going to be at. Now you have to be careful, obviously, that you're not just always kind of lying to yourself and saying, I don't feel good, just because you don't want to hurt and you don't want to work. But I think yeah, but I think for most cyclists, I don't think that's a problem. I think they want to do good work. They're not out there to train to just slack off. So I think, maybe sometimes you don't even have a specific target. This has worked really well for me, as I say, I don't really know what I'm going to have today. So I'm going to go out, and then at 5 minutes, I'm going to be like, oh, wow, I feel amazing today. I'm going to stick with that. Or, yep, it's going to be rough today. So I'm not even going to look at my power. I'm just going to transition to, RPE, rated perceived exertion. And I'm just not even going to look at my power. I'm going to go 20 minutes, and I'm just going to give it everything I have. And that's good enough, So building in some of that flexibility beforehand, I think, can help you not set an expectation for yourself and then be disappointed and be frustrated because you're not, not meeting that expectation.
Absolutely. And think about that from the psychological aspect. If, obviously you're going to train with yourself a lot more often than you do in a race. And if you want to feel good about what you're doing, you got to be able to achieve and have success there, because you go to a bigger race with a lot of people, probably not going to win all of them, right?
Yeah.
You got to know. So you make sure you're feeling good about what you're doing, excited, and failing workouts will not for sure. So
sure,
you want to be motivated for those events. Sometimes those events bring a little bit of sadness because maybe you didn't do as well as you hoped, but buffer that with the fact that you're improving, or maybe you did better than last year, but you didn't get as high a ranking as you wanted. Well, maybe a lot of guys showed up that were stronger than last year. So
yeah, well, and I think this ties into probably some future presentations that you'll have where we were talking about that weekly trends and then performance manager chart. That's where you can kind of wrap in either the disappointment or the success of an individual workout and say, how does that compare in the context of what my training is looking at over over the week or over the month or whatnot. So we've focused specifically on just that ride data and how to kind of pick apart a ride file. But then putting that in context of where am I headed? On average, is my 20-minute power, is it going up over time? What do my sprint numbers look like? What is, there's a lot of different things to look at to kind of determine larger success or failure, not just getting wrapped up in, kind of that day-to-day, what happened just on that ride.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap things up. Thank you for the presentation, Nate. It's been great. Always love having your insight. Being able to ask you questions is awesome. So if you guys like the content from Nate, check out his website, datadrivenathlete.com. He has a great newsletter he puts out. You can contact him through there. He does coaching services if you're interested as well. If you're like our channel, we've got lots of live video content daily. Like the channel. We've got also a calendar of our group rides. So if you go to teamodz.com/calendar, you'll see our calendar of our group rides and races. It'll be in your local time zone, so you'll figure out when you can join them on Zwift. So make sure and check that out. Also, we're very happy to have Training Peaks as a sponsor of the show. They have great analytical tools. We talk about them a lot, and they've offered a discount code for all the watchers of the show. Discount code is ODZ20. ODZ20 will get you 20% off their premium services. So if that's what you're looking for, happy to extend a little discount to you. So thank you so much for coming to the show, and we hope to see you next time.